Pandemic Preparedness, Understanding Patient and Tenant Rights. My name is Wendy Wilkerson, and I'm a member of the Friendship West Social Justice Ministry. I provide leadership to the legal component of the ministry. I am a business operations attorney at Texas Instruments and have been practicing law for a little over 20 years. We are very excited about today's program, which will tackle very timely and relevant topics around medical and housing rights. But before we dive into these topics, I'd like to take a moment for a short prayer. Lord, we thank you for waking us up this morning. We thank you for the opportunity to gather together in this forum where we can exchange ideas, information, and resources. We pray for a productive and positive session in your son, Jesus' name, amen. I'd also like to extend thanks to two very special and important people. Our senior pastor at Friendship West, Dr. Frederick Haynes III. We are truly grateful for his amazing and innovative leadership. I'd also like to thank Pastor Daniel Ayers, who provides dedicated and impactful leadership to our justice efforts at Friendship West. With the support of leaders like Dr. Haynes and Pastor Ayers, we are able to host meaningful programs like this one today. And turning to our program, why are we here? Well, we find ourselves in out of the ordinary times. We are in the midst of a global pandemic that has spread across countries, increased hospitalization rates, and in the United States in particular, we've observed record numbers of unemployment. We are here to arm ourselves with the best information available and to get smarter where we can. What do we need to know if we find ourselves or a loved one having to go to the hospital during this COVID season? What are your rights as a patient? What documentation do you need in place to ensure that your vision for your care is observed? In terms of housing, with record unemployment rates, monthly bills like rent can become an insurmountable task. What should we know about our rights as tenants, or the eviction process, or any of the necessary procedures related to such process? What resources are available to leverage if an individual or family needs assistance with rent or mortgage? This is what we will cover today, and we have a dynamic group of presenters. Two practicing attorneys who will share their expertise in the areas of patient and tenant rights, as well as representatives from three impressive social services organizations that offer rental and mortgage assistance programs. Should you have any questions about any of the content, feel free to raise those questions in the comments sections. We have an extremely valuable opportunity ahead of us today in terms of gathering information, understanding basic legal rights, and highlighting available resources. Let's take full advantage of our time together. I'd like to start with introducing our first presenter, Ms. Alexier Barbour. She is the principal attorney and founder of the law office of Alexier Barbour, PLLC, an estate planning, probate, and crisis management practice. Ms. Barbour is committed to helping individuals and families who may not have previously worked with an attorney or who may lack firsthand knowledge of the inner workings of the legal system. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Ms. Barbour has been providing representation to individuals and families who have found themselves in need of legal assistance due to sudden illness or death. Ms. Barbour believes in taking a proactive approach towards estate planning so individuals and families that she works with can have peace of mind in knowing they have prepared for the unexpected. She is a member of the State Bar of Texas and the J.L. Turner Legal Association in Dallas. Her civic engagement includes work with the Dallas Volunteer Attorney Program, and she also serves as the legal chairwoman for Pearls by the Lake, an official interest group of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Ms. Barbour, thank you for your time, and I turn it over to you.
Good morning or good afternoon. I am Alexier Barbour. I am so excited to be here with you this afternoon, and I am truly delighted with the opportunity to share vital information with our community. Previously, I had a friend on social media post and ask if you had 20 minutes to talk about any particular area that is near and dear to your heart, what would you speak about? And the area in which I was particularly interested in is estate planning. And so by divine arrangement, 20 minutes today, and we'll go ahead and get started. I would be remiss in not acknowledging our senior pastor, Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes III, and our entire pastoral staff at Friendship West. I am a member of Friendship West Baptist Church, and I am very honored to be here to serve our community. So if we can go ahead and get started with the slideshow that I have prepared. Okay, and so today our conversation is going to surround patient rights and medical directives. I am very concerned in regards to our community and whether we're fully prepared for the unexpectedness of this pandemic. And I think that it's very incumbent upon us to recognize the season of uncertainty that we're in and knowing that there are a lot of things that we cannot control in regards to the pandemic, but there are a handful of things that we can. Even within my own family, I've had a family member that contracted COVID-19 and took a turn for the worse. And this family member was admitted to the hospital. And so, as an attorney and as a loved one, my worst fears were realized in the idea of what would happen if this family member became unable to communicate their status and how they were doing, and if they took a turn for the worse, because at the time of their admittance, they had not completed the necessary estate planning documents that would ensure that we as a family would be able to get adequate information regarding their status and how they were doing. And then also, if they became unable to make decisions for themselves, as so many are once they are diagnosed and are in the thick of this disease and virus, what we would do as a family to ensure that the individual that was in the hospital, all of their needs were being met, their best interests were being protected. We were unprepared. And so, like many of you, I can understand that this is a difficult time, that this is a difficult conversation to speak about. But we have to prepare for the unexpected, because once we do that, we get the peace of mind that we need in a season of uncertainty. And so our conversation today is going to center around three particular topics: the Patient Bill of Rights, and then two medical directives, which are legal documents that you can prepare in advance of illness, are the medical power of attorney, and then a HIPAA authorization. And so we'll go ahead and continue on with the conversation to our next slide. And so there are state and federal protections that are available should you find yourself a patient within a hospital across the United States. I know that there are many individuals that may be watching this presentation that are not residents of the state of Texas. So from the beginning of this presentation, I want to make it clear that these particular things that we will be talking about, many of them are going to apply to Texas residents. But if you are in need of these legal documents or just information that you are seeking, please reach out to your local and state bar association. So those that live in larger metropolitan areas, you will likely have a state bar such as the Dallas, Houston, Austin, Sacramento bar associations. But then within your particular state, there are resources that are available. And so if we can go back to, I believe it's two previous slides. Okay, one forward, please. Thank you. if we can go forward to there you go, to the next slide. Okay, and so there are state and federal protections that are available, particularly the United States Department of Health and Human Services. There's a policy during COVID-19 to protect your civil rights. And so the federal government wanted to make it very clear that even now, the civil rights that you were afforded prior to this pandemic are still very much in place. And so it's really important that we make sure that we understand that there has been billions of federal dollars that have been allocated towards our care and making there being access and affordability to treatment. Now, in regards to your civil rights in COVID-19, there is a policy that's in place, that's been in place for a number of years, that really ensures that you are not discriminated based on race, color, national origin, disability, age, sex. And so there's also protections for the exercise of consciousness and your religions, because there are many religions that are particularly affected during this pandemic in how they will be treated. And so it's really important to make sure that if you find yourself in the position where you feel like you're being discriminated against, not only during the pandemic, but if you're attempting to receive medical care and you feel that you're being discriminated against, that you recognize that the Office of Civil Rights with the United States Department of Health and Human Services has protections for you. And then there are enforcements and there are remedies there should you find that you're being discriminated. And so if you will back up for me a few slides. And one more for me. Okay, thank you. And so in regards to access and affordability of treatment, this is something that's incredibly important for our community. There are so many people that throughout the country that are still uninsured, despite there being the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare being the norm. So many people are still uninsured. If you find yourself uninsured right now, please do not let that prevent you from seeking treatment if you have symptoms of COVID-19. There has been an allocation of $175 billion from the federal government to assist those that are uninsured, particularly in regards to testing. $14 billion for testing alone was allocated by the federal government. And then, of course, there were additional funds from the private sector. And so if you are uninsured, you can receive care just as if you were insured if you contract COVID-19 and you're hospitalized. Additionally, if you, for some reason, do receive a bill, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has also advised that they are making a concerted effort to protect patients from debt collectors because of COVID-19. And so there have been protocols that have been put in place by our federal and state governments. So if you are in need of treatment, please spread the word to your family members. There shouldn't be anyone at this point that is not seeking treatment because they are uninsured. And so moving on to the Texas Patient Bill of Rights, the Patient Bill of Rights, not only in Texas, but in all 50 states, are the rights and requirements for all hospitals. And particularly within the state of Texas, there is a state law that outlines all of the rights that you have if you find yourself hospitalized. So the hospital must respond to your reasonable request for treatment and service, as long as it's something that they can fit within their mission and they're capable of doing, and it's within the law. A reasonable request from a patient will not and should not be denied. Patients also have the right to reasonably informed participation in regards to decisions of your healthcare. Now, particularly within COVID-19, there are so many things that we don't know about the virus. The doctors and the healthcare providers really are doing the very best that they can in establishing a standard of care, which would be a universal treatment for COVID-19. However, as the medical knowledge continues to advance and we know more about how to treat the pandemic, there will be options in regards to your healthcare and how you are treated. So I want to make it perfectly clear that if you find yourself in the hospital, whether it's COVID-19 or something completely different, your healthcare providers have to communicate their treatment plans. They have to offer you options in regards to what the expectation is going forward with your treatment, and you have the right to be involved. It's not one of the situations that you see where you're just going into the hospital and the doctors are coming in and they talk to you and you don't really understand. You have to advocate for your health, ask the questions that you need answered, and insist that your questions are answered in a way that you understand. And so we'll go ahead and go on to the next slide. So in addition to the pre-mentioned Bill of Rights, there are the right of informed consent and the right to refuse treatment. You do not have to adhere to the protocols that the healthcare providers put in place. It's your body and your right. So by the state law, the doctors have to provide you with all of the treatment options, and you have the right to refuse treatment. But in refusing treatment, state law requires that your medical providers explain to you the consequences of refusing treatment. We're going to talk about in greater detail access to your medical records and then protection and privacy for your medical information. And then also you have the right to create an advance directive. And so an advance directive are your values in regards to your end of life treatment. Additionally, your medical power of attorney can fall under those directives. And if you have drafted those documents, the hospital is obligated to follow what you have put into place. One of the particular things that I'll note before we move on is the right of a patient to be informed of human experimentation and other medical research and education projects that may be affecting your treatment. And so particularly with the COVID-19 being a novel virus, meaning this is the first time we've ever seen it, the medical community is in dire need for information in regards to the treatment, the and the long-term effects of this virus on patients. However, you have the right to say that you do not want to be a part of any clinical trials. You do not want to have any of your DNA, your samples, or any of your medical information used for research and gathering purposes up to a certain point. And so there are some additional nuances to that that we really, it would take a much longer time than we have today to go into, but I want to make it perfectly clear that you have the right to say that you do not want to be a part of any of the research and educational projects surrounding COVID-19. And so if we will go ahead to the next slide. And so the documents that I want to speak about today, particularly in regards to preparing for the unexpected, are the medical power of attorney and HIPAA authorization. And so a medical power of attorney is a legal document which gives a person you trust authority to make healthcare decisions on your behalf when you cannot make decisions for yourself. And so this document only goes into effect once you are unable to make those decisions and a doctor certifies that in writing. So even after you draft this document, you still have the right to make healthcare decisions for yourself as long as you're able to. I cannot express enough that your agent should be someone that you trust. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's your next of kin or your spouse. I typically advise clients that you should name someone who is very level-headed, who is good in an emergency, and someone who is able to communicate and understand what a doctor would be telling them in regards to your medical treatment. And so in order for someone to be your agent, they have to be 18 years of older. And then once you sign that document, it has to be signed in the presence of two witnesses, and your witnesses have to sign as well, or it has to be notarized by a notary public. And so we're going to go through very briefly a medical power of attorney. If we'll go to the next slide, there are some pertinent parts of this document that I wanted to highlight. So here is a sample medical power of attorney. And so our client today is Will Smith. And so Will Smith has designated his cousin, Carlton Banks, as his agent to make all of his healthcare decisions for him. And then again, as previously stated, the medical power of attorney takes effect once will is unable to make healthcare decisions. And so this is a pretty standard portion of any medical power of attorney. And we have the patient and the principal, which is Will Smith, and the agent that would be in charge of his healthcare decisions is Carlton Banks. And so with our next slide, we'll see that Will has named some alternate agents in place if Carlton is unable to make decisions. And so sometimes you'll have a situation where the person you've named as your agent is either unable or unwilling to make healthcare decisions. It may be a situation where it's just emotionally too much for them, or they may be unavailable. I've seen situations where someone has been international or in mid-flight on a 20-hour flight and there's a medical emergency. And so in that place, you'll have these agents who are going to step into the place of the original agent. And so Will has named for his first alternate his aunt, Vivian Banks. And then it's important to note that his second agent is his friend, Jeffrey Butler. And so I'm sure you guys are catching on that I'm using the characters from a very popular show within our culture, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And I wanted to note that while Jeffrey isn't a relative of Will, it's still perfectly responsible and prudent for Will to name Jeffrey as an agent. And he could have even named him as his first agent. The person doesn't have to be related to you. It really needs to be someone you trust. And so we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. There are a few more things that I want to note for the medical power of attorney. And so the duration of a medical power of attorney, it exists indefinitely. And so this is a document that once you draft it, it's going to be a permanent document unless you establish when you draft the document that it's for a shorter time or you revoke the power of attorney. And so if you've ever drafted a power of attorney before and you've named other individuals, as soon as you draft a new power of attorney, any previous healthcare directives in regards to naming an agent, they're automatically revoked. And so we're going to go ahead and move on to the HIPAA authorization. And so the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act is a law that was passed by Congress in 1996. The privacy portions of this law was passed in 2003. And this is a legal document which provides patients with access to their medical records. And so they can have more control over how their personal health information is used and disclosed. And so this is a document where if you find yourself in the hospital, whether it's COVID or any type of medical issue, and not even just the hospital, it can be a doctor's appointment, someone that you've named, and it can be more than one person that will have access to your health information. So that's your medical records. And they will be able to ask doctors questions. And I'm going to go into more detail over exactly what the HIPAA authorization does and the powers that you have once it's drafted. And so once you draft this document, it requires your healthcare providers to answer questions that your personal representatives will pose. And that's not just about what's going on at that exact moment. It's about your condition, the treatment, any test results that you have, the prognosis of what they anticipate will happen as whatever your medical issue is progresses, and then any and all other information that's important to your healthcare. And I want to make it clear that even if you're fully competent to ask questions and discuss your medical condition, your personal representatives can still ask questions as well. So this is a really good document for children who are caregivers, or even just children that want to help their parents as they're getting older, assisting them with doctor's appointments. And so if you have a loved one that you know needs help in this area, this is the document for you. And so if we'll go ahead and go to the next slide, I'll show you the relevant portions of the HIPAA authorization. And so the statement of intent right here, which this is language that the state of Texas requires to be in your authorization, you understand that this limits the disclosure of your information to certain family and friends, regardless of your state of health. So if individuals if they're not named as your personal representative, they will not have access to this information. There are sanctions that are in place federally if hospitals, doctors' offices, insurance companies provide this information to those that are not your personal representatives. And so that's why when you'll call a doctor's office and you may ask for information, or if you have a family member that's in ICU, and I remember years and years ago, you used to could call ICU and there was like a 4-digit code you could give prior to HIPAA, and you would be able to get information about a patient. HIPAA changed all of that. If you're not listed as a personal representative, you will not have access to that information. And so if we'll go to the next slide, you'll see here that Will Smith has named 4 individuals authority to be able to get access to his information. Again, his cousin Carlton, his aunt Vivian, his friend Jeffrey, which were named as his medical power of attorney. He trusts them also to get this information, but he also named his friend Jazzy Jeff. And so this is one of those documents that's really good for if you have someone that you know you wouldn't name as your medical power of attorney, such as Hillary and Jazz in this situation. Will knows that they're not the people that he would trust to make medical decisions for him, but he absolutely believes that these individuals would be able to get access to his information, and he would want them to know what's going on with him. And so he's named them in this document. And so if we'll go to the next slide. So it gives them the authority, as I previously explained, to ask and answer questions about your health condition. And so this document is all encompassing. Once you name someone as a personal representative, that person can discuss the same things that you would discuss with your doctors. If you have a personal representative that provides this document to a healthcare provider and they refuse to give them information, that personal representative can bring a legal action against anyone who refuses to accept and recognize the authorization. And so if we'll go ahead with our next slide. So I want to make it clear that the information that you will be able to receive, again, medical history. So it's not just your records, it's medical history, your condition, anything that your doctor's offices, your insurance company would have. And then I want to make a perfect note of this healthcare providers that you see at the bottom of this slide. It truly is all encompassing: doctors, dentists, therapists, laboratories, even ambulance services, residential care. If it's listed there, if it's regarding your health, those individuals will have access to your information. So this gives you peace of mind if you find yourself with limited access to a loved one because of the pandemic. If you have this document drafted in advance, you will be able to get access to their information. Now, I want to note, because I have several family members that are medical providers, during this pandemic, they're doing the very best that they can. So I want to make it clear that even if you draft this document, this is not one of those where you shove it in a doctor's face and you insist that they stop everything that they're doing to answer all of your questions. We have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to ensure that the patient is being cared for, but this document still gives you access. And so that's what's most important. No one wants to be shut out of the care of their loved one because of limited access to them physically because of this pandemic. And so if we'll go ahead with our next slide. What's next? So I've given you all of this information. I've explained to you that there are 2 vital documents that can help you. On Saturday, January 23rd at 11 a.m., we will be having a legal clinic where you can register to have all of these documents, the medical power of attorney and HIPAA authorization, drafted for you. And so you can register at friendshipwest.org after the conclusion of this event, and registration is limited. But if you want to have these documents drafted by a licensed attorney in the state of Texas, please go ahead and register. And so I'm going to go ahead with our next slide and entertain any questions that we may have in the comments section. We have a quote here that I really want to note. It says, when you don't know what to expect, prepare for the unexpected. And in doing so, by preparing these documents, it really will give you the peace of mind of knowing that while there are so many things during this pandemic that are out of your control, there are a handful of things that we can. I thank you so much, and I am ready for any questions that we may have.
Oh, thank you so much, Alexier, for that really informative overview. Pastor Ayers, we know you've been monitoring the chat. Are there any questions?
Yes, we have two questions that have come up in the chat, and I believe Attorney Barbour, you probably have already answered. We want to answer it again for those who may not have been with us. The first question is regarding the new vaccines. Are patients able to refuse to take the vaccine if they're already in the hospital, or if they arrive at the hospital, are they forced to take the vaccine?
There was a little bit of feedback, but if I'm understanding correctly, the question was, are patients allowed to refuse the vaccination if they're already in the hospital? The answer to that is yes. I am not aware, unless there has been some new law or policy that has been implemented. I'm not aware of any requirement for a patient to be forced to take a vaccination if they find themselves in the hospital. Again, in regards to the right to refuse care and the right to refuse research and education surrounding this pandemic, you have the right to say no.
Okay, and the next question, and I think we answered this with your concluding comments, but just to reiterate, the question is, the forms you mentioned, are they available for someone to print? And can they take it straight to a notary public, or do they have to go through an attorney?
You do not have to go through an attorney. Thank you. That's an excellent question. So these documents, for the most part, are available online. I want to caution that it's important to seek the advice of an attorney. The language in both the medical power of attorney and HIPAA authorization in the state of Texas is statutory language, which means that our state representatives prepared the language. And for the most part, that language is exact. And so if you go to a search engine on the internet and put in Texas medical power of attorney, look for those reputable government websites. They're going to have this document there and you can draft them. However, I want to make it clear that you should seek the advice of an attorney, because you can't guarantee that everything on the internet is going to be in accordance with the requirements for the power of attorney. So that is a tricky question. You can find these documents, but just make sure that you're reviewing them. And if something looks off, stop and then seek assistance. Make it clear that
okay. Thank you. I think those are the only two questions that I've seen at this point. If others come up, we'll come back to those. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was great. And just to make sure, if you do need other information and would like to participate in the legal clinic on January 23rd that Ms. Barbour mentioned, please go to friendshipwest.org and click on events where you're able to register for that event. So thank you again, Ms. Barbour. Very, very well done overview. And I really liked how you brought in, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So I think many of us are really, familiar with that. And we all know why Will would not select Hillary as his agent. But again, well done. So I'd like to move on to our next presenter, Mark Melton. He is a tax attorney at the Dallas office of the law firm Holland & Knight. Mr. Melton's practice includes focusing on corporate and federal income taxation issues, as well as other investment partnerships, joint ventures, and real estate investments. But this is his day job. Mr. Melton has a second job, or better, I think it's a ministry. He started this about roughly 10 months ago at the beginning of this pandemic. At first, he was answering questions on Facebook from renters around eviction notices, but the volume was so high that he launched the website, DallasEvictions2020.com, and recruited over 80 attorneys to help answer questions from renters who received eviction notices. In short, he is helping individuals and families understand what they absolutely need to know about tenants' rights and the eviction process. And this is all done free. He has been steadfast in the support of those who just need a helping hand when they find themselves in a state of crisis. Thank you, Mr. Melton, for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come speak to you guys and talk a little bit about evictions law and what your rights are and what other kind of protections and assistance are available. It's probably a good place to start just to talk about what does the eviction process itself look like in normal times. Texas is a state that does not have many or almost no tenant protections. It's a very landlord-friendly state. And so what the process looks like generally is if you fall behind on your rent or there's some other kind of lease violation, the first thing the landlord has to do is put up something called a notice to vacate. And this is a notice that gets put on the inside of your door or mailed by certified mail. And it's scary, and it says you have 72 hours to vacate the premises. And a lot of people look at that and they think that is a legal document that they have to actually comply with. And the reality is it's not. It's just step one of the eviction process. You can actually just ignore that. You don't have to vacate the premises within 72 hours if you don't want to. All it does is set up step two. So under the Texas Property Code, once the landlord posts that 72-hour notice, after the 72 hours expires, if you have not left voluntarily, then they can file an eviction lawsuit. And this is where the process starts to become a little bit more serious. And when they file that eviction lawsuit, what will happen is the justice of the peace for the precinct, wherever you live, will set that case for a hearing. And if you go to the hearing and you are still behind on rent in normal times, what would happen is that judge would then issue an order for eviction because in normal times, there are no defenses. You're either current on your rent or you're not. And then by statute, they have to wait 6 days after that date. And then on day 7, they put another notice on your door that says, this is a 24-hour notice. You have to be out by tomorrow. This notice is always posted by the constable or the sheriff, not by the landlord. And this one is the serious one that you really do need to take seriously, because the next day, the constable will show up with the landlord. They will remove all of your belongings from the house and put them in the front yard. And at that point, you will no longer be able to stay in that place. So that two-step process is what happens normally. Now, since COVID, there's been quite a few moratoriums that have come up. I'm sure you guys have heard about some of these things, and they've changed over the course of the last 10 months. We started off with one from the Texas Supreme Court. We had some from the county judge. In the city of Dallas, we've passed another ordinance, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But now, as of January 2021, there really are only two protections for tenants facing eviction. The first one, which is the national moratorium, comes under an order from the Centers for Disease Control. It initially was issued in September. And what it says is, as long as you meet certain requirements, then you are a covered tenant and your landlord cannot evict you until January 31st. Now, initially, this went to December 31st, but Congress, when they passed the new relief bill a couple of weeks ago, it extended that from December 31st to January 31st. So now this order still applies, but there are a few important things to note. The first one is this order does not apply automatically. So it does not afford you any protections unless you do some things. So the first thing that you have to do is you have to fill out a CDC declaration, which is just a piece of paper that certifies that certain things are true. And you sign that. And then if you give it to your landlord, then that creates the protection that landlord is then no longer able to evict you until after January 31st. The whole idea here is that hopefully before January 31st, you can get rent assistance or some other kind of help or find a new job and get caught up. I expect that there will probably be some kind of further extension of this moratorium or a new moratorium after the 20th when Biden takes office, but we'll have to wait and see. But if you look at this declaration, which by the way, you can find a copy of it on our website at dallasevictions2020.com. So there's a PDF of it on there. You can go there, print it off and sign it. It's already prepared for you. But it says a few things. You need to make sure these things are true because you're signing this document under penalties of perjury. And so if they're not true, you could get into a little trouble. But more importantly, if it's not true, there may be a hearing where the judge is going to ask questions to determine whether this is not true. And if it's not, you don't have any protections under the CDC order. So the first thing that you've got to certify is that you've made best efforts to get rent assistance. Now this is a little bit of a tough one because a lot of people, at least that I've talked to, and we've talked to over 4,500 tenants in the last 10 months that we've helped facing evictions. And probably 70 to 80% of them didn't know that the moratoriums exist. They also didn't know that rent assistance was available. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't say that you had to have made best efforts the entire time. Just before you sign it, you have to make best efforts. And so what I tell people is before you sign this thing, if you haven't already, go to some of these rent assistance organizations, make an application. You should get an email that at least confirms you made an application. It might, especially right now, say we're out of money, we can't help. But just having that proof that you made an effort to get rent assistance is what matters. And by the way, we'll talk more about rent assistance later in this program. But the second thing is, as long as you make under $99,000 a year, or if you're a married couple, under $198,000 a year, then this qualifies for you. If you make more than that, then it doesn't. You also have to have made best efforts to make partial payments on your rent. Now, sometimes you see the situation a lot where people have been out of work for months. They're barely able to put food on the table. In some cases, they're not able to put food on the table. And your best efforts may still result in not being able to make any kind of partial payment on your rent. The order does not require that you've made a partial payment, just that you've made best efforts. So to that end, if you do have, even if it's $50 or $10 or $100 or whatever it is, and you try to pay that to your landlord, most landlords are going to refuse to accept partial payments anyway. But at least then you can have some kind of evidence. Hopefully you would do this by email or some kind of written exchange so you have evidence of it. Because if you go into the court and you say, I tried to make a partial payment, but the landlord refused to accept it, that checks that box and you should be okay on that front. There's some other certifications on there that essentially go to that you understand that the rent is still due. This order does not delay rent. It doesn't say that you don't owe the rent. It doesn't stop late fees. All these things are still accruing. And so you just have to certify that you understand that this is the case. Just because they can't evict you doesn't mean the rent isn't still due. You also have to certify that you've had some kind of loss of income or medical bill or something like that during COVID. It doesn't require that it was as a result of COVID, just that it happened during COVID. So if you lost your job or you had reduced hours or furloughed or anything like that, that will satisfy that element. So as long as all these things are true, then you sign the form, you give it to the landlord. That will stop your eviction in theory until January 31st. Now, if you're actually in the middle of an eviction lawsuit, if they've already filed it against you, maybe you're in a situation where the judge has even already issued the eviction against you, but you haven't been kicked out yet. You can still provide this CDC declaration right up until the moment that they remove you and your possessions from your home. So it's not too late just because you've had an eviction issued against you by a court. You can still give the CDC declaration and it will still delay your eviction until the end of the month. Now, once you do that, then the landlord has the ability to contest your declaration, meaning they can go back to the court and complain and say, I don't think all of these things in this declaration are true. And the one we see the most of is they say they never tried to make a partial payment, therefore this doesn't apply. So which is why I think it's important that you at least make an effort to pay something, even if it's de minimis, so that when you get back to court and the judge asks these questions to see whether this declaration applies to you, you can provide evidence of all of these things to show that yes, it does. Because there are certain judges in the city that will find any excuse to side with the landlord and grant an eviction. So you want to make extra carefully sure that you're prepared for those hearings. Now, the other important point on the CDC declaration is it only applies to evictions for the non-payment of rent. So it doesn't apply if the landlord wants to evict someone because they're engaged in criminal activity, selling drugs, if they've got someone living in their apartment that's not on the lease, is in violation of the lease, if there's damage or disrepair, all these kinds of things that don't have anything to do with money, they're just other lease violations. the CDC declaration does not protect you. And so what we're seeing is there are some landlords out there that when they file the eviction suit, they're not even asking for the back rent. They're making these claims that this eviction is about something else because they're trying to make an end run around the CDC declaration. And so you've got to be able, if that's the case, be able to argue to the judge that this is really a pretextual argument. This has nothing to do with these other lease violations. They're making that up. What they're really mad about is the non-payment of rent, and they're just trying to get around the CDC declaration. We've been pretty successful making those arguments in court over the last 4 months, but it works sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. It really just depends on the facts and what kind of evidence that the landlord can bring. Now, once you get through this part of the process, let's assume that they've filed the eviction against you. The judge has granted it. You can actually appeal that decision. And in evictions, when you file an appeal, you basically get a complete redo with a different judge. And so you file this appeal. It's a relatively simple process. What you do is you, for most people anyway that are facing evictions, are obviously low on cash. And so you file something called an affidavit of inability to pay, or some people refer to this as a pauper's affidavit. And what it says is it lists your financial information, shows your income, your expenses, any kind of savings or assets that you may or may not have. And you're basically claiming to the court, I can't afford to pay any of the court costs or fees associated with appealing this eviction. And as long as all these things are true, then all those fees get waived. And you just file that with just a handwritten letter or a notice that says, this is my notice of appeal, and here's my affidavit of inability to pay. And that will start the appeal process, which, by the way, will stop the eviction process in its tracks until this appeal is heard or otherwise dismissed by the county court at law. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when you file an appeal, you are required within 5 days of filing that appeal to post 1 month's rent into the registry of the court, which means you have to take a check for 1 month's rent to the Justice of the Peace Court and pay that rent to the court, and they just hold it in their account until the case is resolved. Now, in almost all cases, that money is eventually going to end up going to the landlord and not back to you, unless the whole eviction thing was false and you weren't behind on rent. For a lot of people facing eviction, though, they don't have that money to be able to pay the 1 month's rent into the court's registry, which is why it's so important that you win at the Justice of the Peace level so that we can get these evictions stayed until after January 31st without having to pay that money into the registry of the court. Because if you don't pay that 1 month's rent in, they're going to dismiss your appeal and then issue the writ of possession, which is the document that allows the constable to come and remove you from your home. Now, that's kind of an outline from beginning to end of what the eviction process looks like with the CDC order and the possibility of an appeal. If you happen to live in the city of Dallas, and for some reason people get confused when you say, do you live in Dallas? And they might live in Irving or Garland or something, or in Dallas County. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the actual city of Dallas. They passed an ordinance back in April. And what this ordinance says is it creates a third step in the process. So recall a second ago, I said the steps for an eviction are you or the landlord rather will post a notice to vacate. And then after 72 hours, they will file an eviction suit. If you look at the state statute, those are actually steps 2 and 3. It really is a 3-step process. Step 1 just usually doesn't apply. What step 1 says is if your lease or an applicable law requires a notice of proposed eviction, then you can't move to step 2, which is the 72-hour notice to vacate, until after the tenant has had an opportunity to respond to that notice of proposed eviction. So what the City of Dallas ordinance does is it created an applicable law that requires a notice of proposed eviction. They have to give this to you first as step 1. The tenant then has 21 days to respond in writing to the landlord, claiming that they have some kind of COVID-related problem. And as long as you respond in writing, and you absolutely should, assuming that's true, you respond in writing to the landlord and say, yes, I've been furloughed, or I've lost hours, or I lost my job, or whatever the issue might be. Then you get a full 60 days from the date they gave you that notice before they can move to step 2. And I want to make sure this is clear because people get confused on this all the time. It's not 21 days and then you respond and then you get another 60. It's a total of 60 days from the date the notice was first given. So if you respond on day 21, you get another 39 days until they can move on to step 2. So effectively, this ordinance creates a 60-day delay in the eviction process for people that live in the city of Dallas. If the landlord did not give you that notice, they skipped that step, and the first thing they gave you was the notice to vacate, then they've gone out of order, and their eviction filing is improper, and most courts will just dismiss those if they didn't give that notice. However, you have to be able to make that defense, which brings me to this final point on this issue, which is the most important thing you can do to help yourself in an eviction situation is to take a lawyer with you. And a lot of people, when they get these eviction notices, they just see the front page. It's got a bunch of all caps words on it. It's legalese, and it scares people, and they don't read any further. But usually on the back page of that, there is actually a list of free legal services, written assistance programs that you can call on. So it's important you read through the whole thing. The most important thing here, though, is that you actually show up to your hearing. We see a lot of people that get these notices and they just think that they're out of luck. And so they don't even show up to the hearing. If you don't show up, what is guaranteed to happen is the judge is going to grant that eviction. If you show up, depending on your judge, even if you go without a lawyer, there's some chance the judge is going to ask some questions to see if these protections apply to you and will apply them. But again, your best case scenario is you take a lawyer with you that knows the law, that knows your situation, that can explain to the judge, even the judges that tend to side with landlords, why they have to follow the law and offer you these protections under the CDC or the City of Dallas ordinance so that you're not evicted. And, as Wendy said earlier, we have a program here called Dallas Evictions 2020, which obviously we're going to have to change the name. I didn't envision last March that this was going to go on this long. But you can go to DallasEvictions2020.com. We've got a phone number on there. There's an email address. There's a web form, but you can contact us. And at this point, we actually have over 170 volunteer lawyers that have volunteered in the last 10 months to help people. We've helped over 4,500 tenants facing eviction. We will find you a lawyer that will go to court with you, that will walk you through all the rules and help you out. I think I have a few minutes left here before we move to questions, but I just want one other point. Congress did just allocate $25 billion to rent assistance programs, and that money should be actually dispersed to the states and the cities by, I think, the 20th of January is the deadline. So we will have more rent assistance dollars coming into the system by the end of the month. So even if you're behind and you think your situation is hopeless, there is help coming. You can apply for these funds. You can go to, if you just Google United Way DFW rent assistance, there's a website already set up that has all of the organizations that will be dispersing those funds so that you can find help. And I know some other people are going to talk about some other rent assistance here in a minute as well. But with that, am I out of time, Dr. Ayers? Do we need to move to questions or?
No, you've done really well with your time. And yes, we can move to questions now. Pastor Ayers, I know you've been looking over the chat. What do we have?
Yes, so we have a few questions. I may marry two of them, but the first one is simply, if I receive an eviction notice on Monday, what should I do? What's the first thing I should do?
Well, the first thing you should do is you should go to our website or send us an email at DallasEvictions2020@gmail.com and let us walk you through that process and find out exactly what's happening in your situation so we can advise you. That's absolutely the first thing you should do. Don't try and do this on your own. It's complicated. There's a lot of moving pieces. The law seems to change every week. And so let us help you with that. Don't try and do this on your own. You're not alone. There are people out here willing to help. So take advantage of that.
Okay, and the second question, the other two questions are probably about the same and goes to what you're saying. It was first, they're appreciative that you're offering this information because it's very valuable, but they're also saying people across the state need this information. So we know there's Dallas evictions, but is there any other resource that can be made available if I know someone who lives in Houston, for example? That is one. And the other question is kind of the same. You mentioned a lot of documents today, which are very helpful. And people are asking, how can they access those documents?
All right. So to the first question about, how do you get help if you don't live in Dallas? And our group really is focused just on Dallas County. We've got, 2 million people that live in Dallas County, and a lot of those people are hurting. By my estimates, if we don't get additional government interventions on the eviction front, we should see somewhere between 20 and 40,000 newly homeless people in Dallas County in the first quarter of this year. So this is a very serious issue that we need to spend a lot of time with. And even if we've got 170 volunteer lawyers, given that there are tens of thousands of people just in Dallas County that need this particular assistance, we have to limit what we're doing to Dallas County. But if you live outside of Dallas County or you have friends outside of Dallas County, there are other legal aid organizations out there that you can reach out to. For this part of the state, you can Google Legal Aid of Northwest Texas, and they operate in most of the counties in this part of the state. If you just Google Houston Legal Aid or San Antonio Legal Aid, which I think is actually called the Rio Grande Valley Legal Aid Organization. But if you just type legal aid in whatever city that you live in, there will be a hit on it, and it will show you what the pro bono legal aid options are for you in that part of the state, or even across the country. This is really everywhere in the United States. So that's how I would find those people. To your second question about the documents and where you can get them, we have these documents posted on our website at dallasevictions2020.com. And so you can just go to our website, find the documents, and there's PDFs of them. There's also other explainers and video trainings and informational types of things that are on that website that are helpful. So you can go there and print those off. But again, if you have questions or you need help understanding this, or if you need help applying for rent assistance, we also will point you in the right direction. We're not just offering free legal services here. This has really become a project of half legal work, half social work, because the needs are so great, and people that are in these situations that are facing eviction, this usually isn't the only problem that they have. And so we really have worked a lot with a lot of the nonprofits around the city to try and put together wraparound services to find people the assistance that they need wherever they are and whatever their situation is.
No, that's really wonderful work. I actually have a question, just curious, for attorneys who would like to join you in this effort, how can they sign up?
I'll take all the help I can get. So if you're a lawyer and you would like help, I will train you. I'm available on my cell phone for questions 24 hours a day, and I take those calls and answer those questions to help the lawyers figure all this stuff out and do it right. If you are interested in doing that and you're a lawyer, you can email us at dallasevictions2020@gmail.com and just say you would like to volunteer. We'll set up a training for you and show you what the documents are. Don't be afraid. Even though it is complicated, for most lawyers, this isn't rocket science. And so we can teach you how to be effective at this and really do a lot of good to help a lot of people.
No, that's just really great. And are there opportunities for non-attorneys to help in this effort?
I get that question a lot, and it's tough. If there's anyone out there that is a social worker professionally, we really have a big need for social workers. And in fact, we're looking at incorporating this year and turning it into an actual 501c3 instead of right now, it's just a loose association of attorneys that are kind of all doing this, but we're actually looking to hire a social worker to work with the families that we work with, because people need help applying for unemployment, they need help getting Social Security, they need help getting Medicaid, or whatever else is out there. So we do need those social services assistance. We also set up a GoFundMe. Again, we're not a 501c3, so there's no tax deductions. I just have a segregated account set up. That money goes into that fund, and then I dole that out to people in need, as I see fit. But we've raised over $80,000 in the last few months for that fund, and we have used it in certain circumstances to pay that 1 month's rent into the registry of the courts so that we can perfect an appeal and move that forward. We've used it to help people pay back rent if they're about to be evicted. Sometimes we can use that to negotiate a deal with the landlord. We've used it to help people move when they've actually been evicted, to try and rehouse them in a new location. We've had to pay some medical expenses. We had one family that the kids had the worst case of lice I've ever seen, and we had to have them medically treated so that we could get them into a daycare so that the mom, who was a 20-year-old young girl herself, could actually go to work. And so these are the kind of things I'm talking about when you're dealing with evictions. There are a lot of other issues that you have to set up all of the pieces in order for a person to move on back into some kind of stable environment.
No, thank you, Mr. Melton, for that. I mean, this is really challenging work, but it's needed. And we are also, grateful for what your efforts have been and will continue to be. So thank you again for the time today.
No, it's my pleasure.
We have heard thus far from Ms. Barbour and Mr. Melton. Now we'd like to turn our attention to the 3 social services organizations making an impact every day in the community. We'll hear a little bit more about the rental and mortgage assistance programs offered by Faith Formula, the Chocolate Mint, and Harmony. So we'll start that conversation with Flora Webb, the Social Services Coordinator for Faith Formula. Ms. Webb.
Good afternoon. Glad to join you. Glad that all the information that you all have provided has been so beneficial, not only for me, but I'm sure Felicia, as well as Candy, Ms. Candy Bradshaw, who are my cohorts. When I say they feel like co-workers for me, because we work so closely together on combating some of this rental assistance and trying to get those to keep hold of their homes, because we know that's very important for them to stay in a place where they have the access to determine how they move around because of the pandemic. We don't want anyone surfing couches and staying places where they don't feel safe because of the pandemic. And with that said, my name is Flora Gray Webb. I'm with Faith Formula Human Services, which is the 501c3 of Friendship West Baptist Church. And right now, to be honest, our funding is being held up because we're under an audit, but we're expecting that funding to be released probably towards the end of this month. We are seeking additional funding, but as we know, because of the change of the White House, we are suffering from, or we're in kind of like we're in a parallel on how much funding we're going to receive and how much, where that funding will be issued out to, who that funding will be allowed to. And so with that said, if you all will go to faithformula.org, once our funding has been released, we will be assisting those clients in need. If I will give you some information on who we are currently assisting. FEMA is our funding source at this point in time. FEMA, however, only allows us to take care of 1 month of rent. They do not allow us to do back rent. So those individuals who are in need of back rent, Faith Formula Human Services will not be the agency to go to, because we do not assist with back rent. We only assist with the current month's rent. So if we are released, say January the 15th, if the funding comes down on January 15th, we can still assist with January's rent because we're in that current month. But we will not be able to assist with December's rent because that's out of our scale of what they budget us for. Also, if you are in a home or you're on a lease, you have to have your name on the home or the lease in order to qualify for these fundings. You cannot rent a room. We do not pay hotel fees at this time. There are a lot of people who have moved out of their apartments because they've been evicted, but that's considered non-permanent residency, and we're unable with these fundings to help with non-permanent residency. If you are in a home or you're leasing, we are able to assist during that for that particular funding. We do not currently have assistance for utilities. Unfortunately, that's not a part of the criteria for our funding, but we do assist again with mortgage and lease agreements or rental properties. If you have been affected by COVID-19, that's a part of what our criteria is as well. And then, like I said before, it has to be the current month for us to be able to assist. Okay, and you can't currently live in Fort Worth area. We're only assisting with the Dallas residency. So if you Dallas and Dallas County. So if you are Dallas and Dallas County, we can assist. I know we get quite a few calls from like Fort Worth area, and areas outside of Dallas, and we are unable, unfortunately, to assist in those areas. We even get calls from as far as Houston. So unfortunately, yeah, we're unable to assist in those areas. These funds are only for Dallas and Dallas County. Okay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Ms.
You're
West,
welcome.
for that. Ms.
You're welcome.
Frazier. Oh, you are on mute. Just unmute.
I'm so sorry about that. Good evening. My name is Felicia Frazier. I'm the executive director of the Chocolate Mint Foundation. We are located in DeSoto, Texas, and we service families in Dallas and Ellis County. Currently, we do have funding, so there is funding available now. But before I go into the funding, I want people to understand that, just like Flora said, we work really closely with Friendship West and Harmony. We have an online application process, as does Friendship West and Harmony. We all use the same source. Please do not apply to all three organizations. If you apply to the Chocolate Mint Foundation and I cannot service you, I promise you I have Candy's cell number and I have Flora's cell number, and I will plead your case to them to make sure we can try to get you some assistance if for some reason your case doesn't fit with my funding. I will contact or research or do the referrals behind the scenes to make sure we get you to the best source. Candy does the exact same thing, and so does Flora. Submitting applications 4 and 5 times to all these different organizations, it just inundates us. And we all start working on the same application. And then when we try to fund your application, it says Harmony has her already listed. And maybe Harmony hasn't funded you yet, but she's in the process of funding you. So now we spend days trying to figure out who's actually going to handle this case when we could have actually helped someone else. So the first thing I would suggest is that when you're looking for rental assistance, like Mark said, you can go to United Way, you can go to Harmony's website, Harmony CDC, you can go to the Chocolate Mint, which is mintcares.org, or Faith Formula to apply, but only apply to one organization. Give us time to look at your application. We try to look at those applications within 72 hours. Sometimes, it takes a little longer than that, but we really do try to look at those applications at least preliminarily to see if you're qualifying, which means, is it a COVID case if we're using COVID funds? Is it not a non-COVID? So we know where we're going to move you to when we're trying to pay your rent. But please give us time, first of all, to get to your application. Don't call us all day, every day, because calling us all the time stops us from working your application. We have several different resources or funds that we can pull money from. And when you hear something on the news that says Dallas has all of this money, you can't assume that we have it right now. We will get some of it at some point. So we hope, as nonprofits that are working on rental assistance applications, but we actually may not have the funds just yet. We are working applications right now. We have FEMA funds as well. As Friendship West, like Flora said, we are going to start processing applications again, probably about January the 20th, when the new administration takes over. If you look at our website, we update our website daily. And if you go to our website, it will show you if we open our applications before the 20th. But right now, our applications are slated to be open on the 20th. Good news is I did hear that if you received funding in the past, CARES funding, then you can reapply. I would suggest that you reapply to the organization that funded you first, because there is a service that we use where we can see that these services can be duplicated, which means I can tell that you went to Harmony and I'm going to deny you because you went to Harmony, and I'm going to send you right back to Harmony. So I'm going to ask you, if you received assistance previously for CARES, then go back to your original source so they can give you additional funding. It's going to make your life easier. They already have most of the information. The only thing they'll probably need from you now is going to be an updated ledger or something from your apartments if you're still not working. And it will make your application go faster. Otherwise, just go to our website on the 20th, which is mintcares.org, and you can apply for funding on the 20th. Your funding and your neighbor's funding may be different because I may pull your money from different sources. Just because they said the money is coming down doesn't mean you will qualify for it. We have rules that we have to follow to make sure that we don't get in trouble when we are actually writing these checks to your landlord. And the checks will go directly to the landlord, the apartment complex. We will not write checks to an individual. If you are living in a rent house, please make sure when you contact the Chocolate Mint Foundation that the person that holds the mortgage is the person's name that you're asking me to write the check for. Because if the check is someone else's name, I will probably not write that check until you can sure up that you actually need this assistance. We have to go through so many applications day in and day out, and we really just trying to make sure we're good stewards of this money that has come down to us. We are not trying to hold the money. We are definitely going to spend it. We will work with everyone that we can to make sure that your rent gets paid. We just have to follow the rules. When you apply online, whether it's through the Chocolate Mint Foundation, Harmony, Faith Formula, please make sure you upload your documents. If you do not upload your documents, it is an incomplete application. Incomplete applications will not be processed. We will process that application once submitted. On our platform, you will know your application is submitted if you have entered your initials in the application. Once you have every document required and uploaded, if you enter your initials, it's going to say submitted. If you haven't entered any initials, it's just a pending application. It gives you the opportunity to go in and out and do what you want to do. So you can apply in June, and we've never seen that application because you've never submitted the application. So please make sure that when you're applying online that you actually do everything that's required. Upload everything that's needed. Most of us will need a lease. We will need check stubs. We will need your Texas workforce or your unemployment information. We will need your ID for every adult in the house. We will need the Social Security cards for everyone in the household. So make sure you start trying to obtain and gather that information. So when the applications process comes available, then you are ready to start applying. We can pay 3 months rent, $1,500 a month, depending. And in some cases, it may be different because there's some new things that came down the pipeline. So we may be able to do more than that. Again, there's different funding sources, and those different funding sources have different rules. If you have questions, contact us. But I guess the thing that I really need to say is just be honest. When you call us, be honest. Tell us everything that we need to know so we can help you. If you have someone living in your house and they driving for Uber, and now they can no longer drive for Uber, that's a loss of income. Make sure you give us that information so we can help you get your rent paid. But we have to prove up everything that you say. And if you don't give us enough information, then there's a likelihood that you will be denied. I tell people when they call me all the time about Harmony, Candy's a sweetheart. She's a softie. She loves a story. You pull at her heartstrings and she is going to assist you, and she's going to move mountains to get your rent paid. But you just have to be honest with her, me and Flora, when you're trying to get your rent paid, and we will make sure we get your rent paid on the southern side of Dallas.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Frazier. Thank you so much for that. And that's just a good segue. Ms. Bradshaw, let's hear a little bit about Harmony.
All right, well, thank you. I want to thank Friendship West for putting on this pandemic program just to help our community know that there are resources out there to help you. And I really ditto both Felicia and Flora's comments in terms of this rental assistance. One of the things I want to highlight to you is that we really need, with our funding, as Felicia said, we do have multiple sources of funding, but the biggest funding is COVID related, which means your situation, in order for us to really tap into that 3 months rent, it has to be COVID related. If you were unemployed in 2019, guess what? That is not COVID related. We understand that it's hard to get a job now during COVID, but unfortunately, your situation was pre-COVID, and so you may not be eligible for some of the funding that's out there. And all we can do is, we are receiving grants, and we have grant guidelines, okay? And in order for us to maintain our position to be able to get funds, is we got to follow the guidelines. And so don't take it personally when we say, hey, we need this, 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 and this. It's because the funder requires, we're dealing, especially with all of us, well, Felicia and I have city money. And because the city had some problems on their own with past grants that they didn't handle right, they have put more on us in terms of being able to put documentation down. So when we ask you for things, it is for you to be able to get this money and for us to stay in position to get future monies. It's because when we start reporting and turning in, just like Flora said, they're under audit now. If they find something that they don't like, they're gonna cut you off. They just gonna cut you off and move to somebody else. And so as a community, we have got to understand this money and these resources are out here. It's for the needy and not the greedy. It's not for you so you can go take a trip after we done paid your rent. That's not what this is for. We have people who, just as Attorney Melton was saying, that they're getting evictions. Y'all, I had one person, she didn't know for whatever reason that her lease included her utility payments. So she was paying her rent and she was not paying the utilities. And so they were charging her more in late fees than her utilities because it was all in the lease. And so there's some unique situations. Just read, people, and then understand, just as Felicia said, we share systems. And so we know who has applied where. And for the city of Dallas, they have a citywide database that we go into to make sure that you're not applying all over the place. The best thing is to stay with the one person that brought you to the party, stay with them so that we can help you. We don't want people to be homeless. Our goal is homeless prevention. That's what our goal is homeless prevention within our control. But we also need you to tell us what is going on. It's not fun when you're working with someone and going through an application and then they call you, you've had the application for 2 weeks and they say, well, I got to go to court tomorrow. We got this application for 2 weeks and you just now telling us you got to go to court tomorrow? I mean, it makes it hard for us to tap into our other resources. Some of the things that for the city of Dallas is anybody in zip code 752XX. That city of Dallas money, that it is restricted to the city of Dallas. Many of us are trying to get county funds, which would be DeSoto, Lancaster, Cedar Hill, Duncanville, the Dallas part of Grand Prairie, Irving, all of those. But those are two different sets of monies. And so we can go hard with the city of Dallas because we have those funds. Dallas County, we're chasing all over the place for funds because they didn't allocate a lot of their funds out to nonprofits. They managed it themselves. And so we're trying to tap into those resources. So understand, as a community, we have your best interests at heart, and we have the Southern sector at heart. We are ride or die chicks for the Southern sector of Dallas. And we want the best for our community. But as a community, you have to understand that this is not quote unquote free money. There's some expectations that go along with this money. I know one of the things that we work on is we kind of make you look at your budget. What are you spending on? Sometimes, you know, when you say you're working part-time and you had a little money, but you paid no rent, I don't have no problem asking you, what did you pay? Because here's my attitude. I understand you need a car to get to work, but the bus will also take you to work. So if you got a $600 car note and that's what you paid, you're telling me you don't mind sleeping in your car. Think about it. I mean, think about it. That's your priority versus your apartment, your housing. You're saying my car is more important than me having somewhere for me and my children, having a physical residence address for me and my children to live in. Okay, so don't think that we're being hard on you when we ask you about these things and we ask you to challenge, do you really need a $600 car note? Maybe you need to sell that car and go to Dallas Cans and get one of them cars off the lot. In the interim, you got to do something different. Times have changed and you got to do something different. So don't just, you know, we're trying to educate you as we help you. We're trying to give you a hand up. This is not a constant handout. It's like, okay, let us help you. You know, we're working on right now researching information about these jobs that are paying $20 to $25 an hour. They're temporary, but it's to do contact tracing related to COVID. Hey, it's out here. And if the money is there, and if you got to do something different, and if we need to help you get a computer and some internet so you can do that, that's cheaper than constantly paying your rent every month. If we can help you get some money coming in to pay your own rent going forward, because the monies that are coming down from the city that we're tapping into, if they're approved next week at city council, it applies all the way through December of 2021, but we know it's going to have limitations. It is going to say you can pay up to 3 months. So what you going to do for the other 9 months? Because you will not be able to go to any other entity that has city funding and get the money. And so we've got to proactively think about, this is a situation we're in. How do we make this work for everyone? How do we manage the process? So just know we're here. We work together and we tap into resources. I give people out that eviction 2020 information to help them understand, hey, there's resources, there's legal assistance out here for you. We partner with North Texas Legal Aid. And as I said, we're here to help y'all. Call if you don't know what to do so you can get some proper guidance.
No, and I think that is really, you know, gave some very, you know, practical tips, and that was one of the objectives of today, is to make sure that we highlight, you know, what the available resources are and who to go to when you have questions or you need some support. And so I appreciate that. I appreciate all of the organizations, you know, outlining or highlighting some of the key issues that we need to think about, but also the resources out there to help. So thank you all for that. Pastor Ayers, any questions?
I think we have time to grab one question. The question is, you all talked about funds that you have that possibly available for, in terms of related to COVID money. What if someone has a situation that's not COVID related and they just need help, just a regular person who needs help with rent or assistance? Do you have money available that's not tied to the federal, state, or city level?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
And
That money is much more limited. I think that is
Very much so.
yes,
we
we
don't-
can do 1 month on that type of money.
It's 1 month. Like they said before, CARES Now money, they're assisting with 3 months. Friendship West does not have CARES Now money. They have FEMA money. FEMA money only allows us to do 1 month of rent. So if they have not come to me before and they're seeking assistance, they can come to me for that month's rent. Yes. So those funds are available.
And then one other real important thing is mortgages. The city of
Yes.
Dallas is not paying, the funds we have do not pay mortgage. They consider that as quote unquote asset wealth or something. Some is crazy to me, but they do not pay, we cannot use the funds for mortgages. Now, we have been going in and trying to fight with the city to explain housing is housing. And if those people were blessed to have a house and a mortgage, we just trying to keep them from being homeless. And so we're trying to work on that. I do have some funds, but it's on a case-by-case basis. Because we also talk to people about, hey, go to your mortgage company and ask for a forbearance, put 3 months on behind. You gotta do something different in order to risk your house going into foreclosure. So just know there are other options, even if we can't tap into the funds. But that's one of the things that we're working on very heavily with corporate funders, is we need money for mortgage assistance. And you also need to know that most of this funding that comes out of government, if they pay mortgage, it is only principal and interest. They do
Absolutely.
not pay taxes and insurance.
Right.
Absolutely.
So it's still an issue, you know.
Correct. I was going to say that, and to pay a mortgage is very difficult, because what I can't do is I can't get on the phone and ask that mortgage company to send me information or to complete a application form, because there is a form that FEMA requires that needs to be back on my desk prior to me issuing out a check. And so that holds them up as well. So mortgage is very difficult to pay. Friendship West can pay a mortgage, but it's very difficult because I'm having the client themselves to run around and get this information completed before a check is issued.
And that's again really helpful to know, because sometimes even if you may not be able to cut a check, for example, for the mortgage, but you're still giving some practical tips that people can go and do. And I think that's the most important thing, is to move, do something, rather than just sit there and let something happen to you. And that's what we're about today, is just kind of, again, making sure we make our folks aware of what's out there and how they can leverage that. So, thank you all for your overviews and your time. And this is for all of our presenters. I mean, because they're offering up expertise on a Saturday afternoon. So we truly appreciate all of you, because you could be someplace else, but you're here with us today. So a big thanks to all of you. Please remember, if you want more information or need help or would like to connect with any of our presenters, visit friendshipwest.org and click on events. This is where you'll be able to find the links to the different organizations that we talked about, as well as the registration forms for the upcoming event, specifically the Pandemic Preparedness Legal Clinic, which is on Saturday, January 23rd. Again, this is where the event, which will help individuals prepare the necessary medical documentation that Ms. Barbour went over today. Of course, I want to just make sure everyone knows, if you are planning to attend that event, you really do need to have all of the information in advance of who you will use, or who will be your Carlton, if you will. You need to know that coming into that event, so that way you can get the most out of it. We can be really efficient and effective with that. So thank you all for your continued attention and engagement throughout today's event. Please stay safe and healthy and take care. We're signing off.